And they shall make an ark of acacia wood. 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and 1 cubit and a half the breadth thereof, and 1 cubit and a half the height thereof. And thou shalt overlay it with pure gold. Within and without shalt thou overlay it, and shalt make upon it a crown of gold round about. And thou shalt put into the ark the testimony which I shall give thee. Exodus 25:10, 11, and 16. Of all the objects described in the Bible, nothing excites fans of fantastic stories more than the Ark of the Covenant. The chest overlaid in gold to hold the tablets of law.
What was the Ark of the Covenant? The Ark of the Covenant was a wooden box clothed in gold, which was made in Sinai, according to the Bible, during the Exodus, and was used to carry the tablets of the law.
In Hebrew, the word is Aaron, which means, basically it means chest, a box you can put something into. The Ark of Covenant contained the stone tablets, it's true, but it also contained Aaron's rod that had budded.
You could say that it was a hotline to God Almighty. The book of Numbers says that Moses spoke to the Lord through the ark, and that he heard the voice of God resonate between the 2 gold cherubim sculpted on the cover.
Prophet Samuel, long before the temple was built, he was sleeping. He was assistant to Eli the priest, and was sleeping as the priest's assistant in that part of the tabernacle where the sacred ark rested. And we know that he heard a voice saying, "Samuel, Samuel." He runs through to ask Eli the priest, "Did you call me?" And Eli said, "No, my son, go back to sleep." And eventually they realized that the voice was the voice of God calling Samuel to a religious life. And as it has been said, was the ark a radio for talking to God?
But above all, it was the Ark of the Covenant's military properties that made it the most famous of the ancient relics. Its exploits are legendary. For the Israelites, it was a shield against their enemies, a weapon with formidable and surprising properties. Was there any truth behind this legendary chest?
When we look into some of the great stories of history, I think we need to remember that there are 2 types of truth. There is the truth that has a message and which may or may not be historical, because its message is so important that whether we wrap it in historical characters or simply tell it as a story that's worth telling, a story with a meaning, is less important than the truth which it contains. It's rather like saying if you go to a first-class jeweler and you buy a beautiful diamond, it would normally come in a lovely box. We'd call that historicity. But if it comes in a paper bag, the diamond is no less a diamond.
Where will my quest for this mythical object lead me?
Okay, here we go.
In chapter 24 of the book of Exodus, Moses climbs to the top of Mount Horeb in the Sinai Mountains. On Mount Horeb, God gives Moses instructions for building the ark.
The Bible gives us a description of the Ark of the Covenant It gives a description of how it was built and the measurements in which it was constructed. 2.5 cubits long by 1.5 cubits wide by 1.5 cubits in height.
God instructed Moses to overlay it with pure gold within and without, and to make a cover for it from pure gold, and to make 2 cherubim of gold and place them on the cover.
Its full name is Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh of Armies, who sits above the cherubim. That's the official title. So it's the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh, who sits above the cherubim. Cherubim is a Babylonian word that was transcribed. Originally, it was cherub. 1 cherubim is a cherub, but if there are 2 or 3, then the plural form is cherubim. So we know that it was transcribed from the plural form. What was a cherub? I can tell you flat out with no hesitation whatsoever that it's a winged lion.
They should be placed at each end of the cover, facing each other, with their wings raised.
They are the protectors of divine thrones and human thrones. That's why you see them and often find them confusing. Some of the ways that they have been depicted, you just don't know what to make of them. You always see them illustrated next to a throne or a chair of some kind. On either side of the throne, you see lions with wings. Those are the sphinxes. And when they raise their wings, it knocks the chair over. And when a figure is portrayed sitting on one, it symbolizes that the figure sits above cherubim, protected, completely enveloped in the wings, which touch at the back.
The Lord told Moses to cast 4 gold rings and put them in the 4 corners of the ark, 2 on each side.
And it was built with poles on it, on either side, so that it could be taken with the tribes who'd come out of Egypt until a temple or a location was built into which these tablets could be placed in a Holy of Holies.
The ark became one of the main elements of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The Lord instructed Moses to build a tabernacle for the ark, a large tent to protect it. He added that the men who were to carry the ark must wear sacred garments. The book of Exodus says that eternal glory lies within the ark, and wherever it goes, it will be covered by a glory cloud, like a fire. This glory cloud guided the Israelites as they searched for the promised land. The light emanating from the ark was so blinding that God recommended to Moses that he cover it with a veil to protect himself. It seems that the ark itself was also endowed with the power to destroy.
I certainly think that an object of great power did at one time exist and is possibly still around. I also think that it need not be anything at all to do with the God of love, who is the Father of Jesus. It could simply have been something that a very clever Egyptian technologist put together, and it could perform all kinds of strange tricks.
The second book of Samuel recounts an incident that is revealing, to say the least. While the ark is being carried on an ox-driven chariot, one of the Israelites, a man named Uzzah, stretches out his hand to prevent the ark from falling, and is immediately struck dead.
The ark was apparently imbued with magical properties, that if you touched it, it would shock you and could in fact kill you. There is a recorded instance of one man reaching out to steady the ark as it was on a cart and being hit with a shock and dying. Now, my interest in the Ark has led me to conduct experiments on it with static electricity, and it's the perfect vehicle to accumulate many thousands of volts of static electricity, which when discharged through someone who's in contact with the ground would give you a nasty shock.
According to the book of Numbers, when the ark was lifted up, Moses said, "Arise, O Lord, and let thy enemies be scattered, and let them that hate thee flee from before thy face."
And the men who carried it on poles on their shoulders, and those poles passed through insulating rings. Was there something, some ancient artifact of great power inside that box which it was fatal to touch? I don't know, but I'm intrigued.
The Ark of the Covenant wields immense power. In the book of Joshua, the Ark of the Covenant enables Moses' successor to part the waters of the Jordan River so that the Israelites can cross on foot. The Ark comes to Joshua's rescue once again during the siege of Jericho. The city would not surrender, so Joshua told the priests, bearers of the Ark, to circle the walls of the city with the Ark. On the seventh day, the walls of Jericho crumbled. For some time, the Ark of the Covenant and its mysterious powers continued to guide the Israelites to the Promised Land. The Ark of the Covenant is an icon of the Old Testament. But where did these stories come from? Who wrote them?
Les textes qui font l'Ancien Testament s'échelonnent sur 1000 ans.
The stories in the Old Testament take place over a period of 1,000 years. One community would learn the stories of another community, which had already learned the stories of other communities, etc. It was a real communal chain.
On a par là des textes différents.
At some point, the stories were so well known that they began to transform somewhat in the different languages, with the result that we ended up with different texts and different variations of the same stories.
Je suis pas absolument sûr d'avoir.
So who wrote the Torah? I can tell you, but I'm not absolutely sure that I'm right. Your listeners will react and say, he's going out on a limb.
Au retour de l'exil.
For the most part, the Torah was written after the exile. As the people returned, they developed the theology of the Holy Land, the Promised Land, and they wanted to legitimize this gift.
Donc,
Bits of conversations, archives, and fragments were all used, developed, and commented on to create the Torah.
la Torah.
The first 5 books of the Old Testament make up the Pentateuch, a collection of written documents also referred to as the Torah, which lies at the heart of Judaism.
La Torah est une espèce
The Torah is another founding book that the Bible itself says is not very old.
on voit pas très ancienne.
It was discovered under Joshua's rule in 610 BC, just before Jerusalem fell.
Que Jérusalem ne s'écrase,
The Torah was produced by a group of people who had a need for it.
qui en avait besoin.
Traditionally, these books are all attributed to Moses himself, which is impossible. One of these books, Deuteronomy, tells the story of Moses' death and the events that happened after he died. Unless he managed to somehow write from the grave, there is no way that Moses wrote the book of Deuteronomy. What exactly do we know about this man known as Moses?
I could not, as an honest historian, say that I can prove Moses lived. I can prove that there was an Exodus in the same way that I can prove that gallant Canadian, Australian, and British soldiers stopped Hitler. We know that happened, it's documented, and there are a lot of people alive today who fought through those wars. We don't have that kind of historical evidence for Moses. Neither do we have the need to dismiss him from history.
I can't believe in him as a fictional character. He's not the sort of fictional character you'd ever make up. He's too flawed. He's too human. He's too unbelievable in some senses. He has in him the contradictions which you expect of a real human being.
The stories found in the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus may have been passed on orally from one generation to the next for many centuries before being written down. The Bible is by far the book that has had the greatest influence on the history of the Western world. The first book ever printed by Gutenberg around 1450 was the Bible. Between 1815 and 1992, 6 billion copies of the Bible were printed in more than 2,000 languages. It is to be expected that Bible stories would spark the interest of history enthusiasts who turn to archaeology to help confirm or dispute founding events. Unfortunately, they turned up more questions than answers.
We don't have any proof of the Exodus. We don't have any proof, apart from Flavius Josephus and the Old Testament, of the Ark of the Covenant. But there are some good reasons for this. I'm not saying that you should absolutely believe in the Ark at all costs, but if you think about it, how many libraries in the past have been destroyed? There was the destruction of the library in Alexandria. There was the destruction of the main Hebrew library in the Herodian Temple of Jerusalem, which we know from an eyewitness account was burnt in AD 70. Now, perhaps if we could time travel and go back and look at that library, there might be some written proof.
The book of Exodus tells the story of Moses from his birth in Egypt to the 40 years he spent wandering in the desert. This chapter of the Old Testament is no doubt the one most questioned by historians. Did Moses really free the Hebrews from slavery under the Pharaoh?
Pour moi, l'Exode est un des textes les plus formidables de l'histoire de l'humanité.
In my opinion, Exodus is one of the most challenging stories in humanity's past. Why? Not really because of the Jews. If you tell me that today is Easter, well, for the Hebrews, it is more of a celebration of their exodus from Egypt, their liberation, the formation of a people, etc. The text is important because it is the founding document for the liberation of men, all oppressed peoples, all slaves. That's what makes it interesting. If we look back at history, it's difficult. You take a spindle of thread and pull the thread and it breaks. So when we look at history, what did these Jewish slaves in Egypt build? Historically, it's hard to believe that they built the pyramids. I don't think the Jews were builders. The buildings were too old. We need to read the post-exile stories. We know that the enslavers of Egypt were the Ptolemies, the Greek citizens of Egypt, who searched everywhere to find slaves, especially in Judea, where they found the Jews, who were in complete disarray at the time, which would have been around the 3rd or 4th century BC, maybe even later. The Greek magnates in Egypt wanted to build Alexandria. They had slaves to do the building. And then the Jews, the liberated slaves, established the most famous Jewish community in the world, in the shadow of the library. It was a highly intellectual Jewish society, and as luck would have it, they produced the Greek Bible, the Septuagint, which is considered to be the Bible of Bibles.
Did Moses really part the Red Sea? This period, referred to as the 19th dynasty, is well known by historians specializing in Egypt's past. Archaeological digs have uncovered considerable vestiges from this period, but there is no mention of Moses or the flight of hundreds of thousands of Hebrews across the Red Sea. This silence is somewhat disturbing. Some events described in the book of Exodus, like the plagues that beset Egypt and the destruction of the Pharaoh's armies swallowed up in the Red Sea, should have been worth mentioning in the Egyptian chronicles.
One of the theories which sits at the back of my mind, is why, having agreed that Moses could take his people to freedom, did Pharaoh suddenly change his mind and send the cream of the Egyptian charioteers to pursue them and bring them back? And I would dare to suggest this. Moses didn't have the ark built, as in the biblical account. Having been brought up as a prince of Egypt, he knew what it was, he knew its power, and he took it with him. And when Pharaoh discovered that this one great, powerful, and very valuable ark was missing, he went absolutely berserk and said to his general of charioteers, "Get him back at all costs." And at all costs was the death of the flower of the Egyptian army.
In the book of Exodus, Moses encounters God on Mount Horeb in the Sinai mountain chain. Sinai is a triangular-shaped Egyptian peninsula with a surface area of approximately 60,000 square kilometers, bordered to the north by the Mediterranean Sea and to the south by the Red Sea. The southern area of this peninsula is very mountainous. According to tradition, this is where Mount Horeb lies. Archaeological studies have been carried out in the entire region of Horeb. Scientists have found artifacts which prove that the area was inhabited during the Neolithic period. However, they did not find anything to support a mass exodus or a significant occupation. At best, the pottery and sculptures indicate that the mountains may have sheltered small communities that practiced religious worship. Although it is unlikely that the Moses described in the Bible actually existed, historians believe that his legend was probably inspired by a real figure. No doubt the head of a clan from the Levite tribe, a community that lived in the extreme south of the land of Canaan, the Israelites' promised land.
When we look on the ground in Canaan, we see something very interesting. In the late Bronze Age, you have classic Canaanite settlements. You have their elaborate pottery, highly decorated. You have their sophisticated burials. And then suddenly, at the beginning of the Iron One period, you have in the highlands of Canaan, not in the lowlands, a new sort of people suddenly appearing, like dots all over the map, like lights going on all over the map of Canaan. They seem to be a Spartan people. Their pottery is very plain. They have simple inhumations. Insofar as you can reconstruct their political structures from what goes on in the ground, they seem to be more democratic than the Canaanites who they preceded. But the really interesting thing is that they didn't eat pork. These were the early Israelites, and they appear suddenly at more or less the time that a construction of the Bible says that they should.
This historic Moses probably lived sometime around the 13th century BC.
We don't have any physical proof that Moses existed in the same way as we don't have any physical existence of the ark. We only have descriptions and tradition. The Palestinians have a burial site for Moses south of Jerusalem, which is ancient and highly revered. And of course, he is the central pivotal person in the Old Testament.
After 600 years of oral tradition, the historic Moses had transformed into a man who was larger than life. The chosen one, the messenger of God. In the book of Exodus, the description given for the ark oddly resembles the chest found in certain Egyptian tombs, including the tomb of young Pharaoh Tutankhamun, discovered in 1922 in the Valley of the Kings. This resemblance translates into an undeniable Egyptian influence on the author or authors of the book of Exodus. If such an object had really existed, how could it have disappeared? I'm back in Jerusalem, the promised land, where the ark was carried by the chosen people. In Jerusalem, King Solomon, David's son and successor, placed the ark in a sanctuary that was specially built for it inside the temple, the Holy of Holies.
Reference that exists in the last sighting, if you like, or reference to the ark, was in around 620 BC, when King Josiah asked the Levites, who were in charge of the security of the ark, to bring it out of its hiding place. Now this, to my mind, is most significant, because if you had an ark that contained the almost holy relic of the Exodus and the rule of law, you would have a hiding place for it underneath the floor of the temple somewhere. King Josiah in 620 asked the Levites to bring it out of its hiding place and put it on display to reassure the people of the existence of the law and the existence of their tradition. So 50 or 60 years later, you have the Babylonian invasion. Now, there's no mention, and the Babylonians were very good record keepers, there's no mention in their list of treasure that they took back to Babylon of the Ark of the Covenant. So presumably, it was hidden so well that they didn't find it.
For mystery lovers, this is where the treasure hunt begins.
As far as archaeologists are concerned, it's quite simple. Not one single stone of Solomon's temple has been found. It's underground, under the tiling. If we were to remove some of the tiling, there would be more turmoil unleashed than we could possibly imagine. So Solomon's temple is not suitable for an archaeological dig. Herod's temple, on the other hand, might be a good candidate. But if it's located at the same spot, we haven't found any traces of it, and there is no archaeological file open on it. For now, it is strictly an historic element. There are written texts, descriptions, drawings. There are people who've tried to reconstruct the temple, but we don't know much about the original temple itself. It is difficult to doubt the existence of the temple. It is spoken of so often. And even for Christians, Jesus said, "The temple will be destroyed, and the temple is me." So if we choose to believe that Jesus was speaking a truth, then he must have seen the temple. If you walk around Jerusalem, you should take time to admire the strong wall around the city. It is a powerful structure. It wasn't built to house a Turkish bath or a stadium. No, it's a massive temple. Well, I should say a massive wall around Herod's temple, which it is now believed was inspired by the Romans.
The reason why Nebuchadnezzar did not seize the ark is because when he arrived at Solomon's temple, it was no longer there.
So, what happened to the ark after its last recorded appearance in the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem? Nobody knows. There are many, many theses.
There are several theories as to what became of the ark. According to one of those theories, the ark is now buried in a cave near Mount Horeb. Allegedly, before the Babylonian invasions, the prophet Jeremy took the ark to a cave near the spot where Moses saw the burning bush, and it is still there.
After the temple was ransacked by waves of invaders, it could have been taken by the Assyrians, it could have been taken by the Babylonians, it could well have been hidden by one of the priests or the prophets in some safe cave on a mountain. It could be hidden somewhere near Qumran, where the mysterious scrolls were found. It could have made its way to Ethiopia, but that involves the romance between King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba.
The ark may have been kept safe in a small village in northern Ethiopia. This scenario is supported by both biblical sources and a long oral tradition.
If we're looking for the last resting place of the ark, and we're looking for one of the many hypotheses, the Ethiopian hypothesis that it is at Axum in Ethiopia stands up as well as anything. The Ethiopian historians themselves trace the events back to one of their good and great early rulers, a man called Menelik, whose name translates as son of the wise man. And when we read of the encounter between King Solomon and the beautiful Black Queen of Sheba, we have to remember that one of the books of the Bible is called the Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon, and it is a very beautifully told and very erotic love poem telling of a beautiful black girl with, we assume, King Solomon himself, who wrote the poem. Now, there's also a reference, and you know how biblical phrasing can be rather coy, and it simply says, she was amazed by Solomon's wisdom, and he gave her all that her heart desired, which may be a rather twee little phrase for saying he made her pregnant. So back to Sheba goes the beautiful Black Queen, who is now carrying Solomon's son, and the boy is duly born, and when he reaches adulthood, she tells him who his father really is, and says, I know you'd be welcome, do you want to go and see him? And there are accounts in Ethiopian folklore and history of how Menelik goes back, is greeted by Solomon with recognition, great pride and pleasure, and when he leaves, is given the ark for safety, because Solomon thinks that the enemies are gathering around Jerusalem and the ark will be safer with his son and the queen, his mother, in the powerful land of Sheba.
According to the Kebra Negast, or simply Negast, sacred writings dating back to the 13th century and considered as dogma by most Christians in Ethiopia, the ark was held for a long time in a chapel on Lake Tana. The precious relic is now kept in the small St. Mary of Zion church in Axum.
But there are other difficulties with the story. The ark, which is said to be in Axum in the highlands of Ethiopia, was seen by a number of people before the Ethiopian authorities got coy about showing it, and it's patently a medieval Christian object. It has crosses all over it. It doesn't look anything like the thing which was dragged by the Israelites through Sinai.
Many books have been written on the subject, and most of them tend to agree that the ark ended up in Ethiopia, although there is not really much to base this on.
One piece of evidence which is used by the people who say that the Ethiopian thesis is right is A, the existence of Jewish people in Ethiopia, the Falashas, and secondly, the fact that these Falashas have, or had, most of them in Israel now, very ancient ceremonial practices which are supposed to indicate that the community has been shut off from the outside Jewish world for a very, very long time. It represents a particularly ancient, sort of Solomonic Jewish tradition. There's no reason to suppose that that has any connection with the Ark at all.
The old city of Jerusalem is now dominated by a beautiful mosque, referred to as the Dome of the Rock, named after its golden dome-shaped roof. The mosque was built around 690 AD on the same spot as the former Temple of Herod, which in turn had been built on the site of Solomon's temple. Another theory is that the Ark never left Jerusalem. When the city was captured by the Babylonians, the priests, fearing that the Ark might fall into the hands of their enemies, hid it in a secret chamber that had been built under the temple. Supposedly, it is still there.
This is interesting because there is no, as yet, there is no physical evidence, physical archaeological evidence of the existence of the Temple of Solomon. On the other hand, it's impossible to dig on the Temple Mount because it's such a holy site, both to Islam and to Judaism. So the existence of a temple is very important to all this. Without the temple, you don't have the story of the Ark. So it depends what you want to look for first.
Thanks to construction work done in the 19th century, we now know that beneath the mosque lie a series of tunnels and underground chambers that to this day have not been explored.
Warren, the great British engineer who surveyed the Mount, Temple Mount, and dug further than anywhere else than anybody else, was interested in finding the Ark. And he knew that it could have existed under the Mount. But the area is so vast and it's so difficult, even though he had permission to dig, he didn't find anything, although he found many chambers and many tunnels. So my theory, my feeling is that if it's anywhere, it's there, where it was supposed to be in the first place.
The current site of the Dome of the Rock was also the site of the headquarters of the Knights Templar, an order of knights who were both military and religious in nature in the 12th century. During their occupation of the temple, hence their name, Knights Templar, these military monks who became mythical over the centuries discovered many hidden treasures, including the amazing Ark of the Covenant. They secretly carried it out of Israel into Europe, where they hid it once again.
I think if they found the Ark, what point would it have been to take it out of that location? Templars, for instance, wanted to be there in Jerusalem. They were the poor knights of the Temple of Solomon. They would be hardly likely to transport a relic like that back to France or anywhere else where it could be endangered.
Many authors of fictional archaeology have proposed different digging sites.
Hugues de Payne and the other 8 Templars went digging. Were they looking for it in order to take it out and put it to an even safer spot in Chartres?
On one of the pillars in the Chartres Cathedral in France, a former high meeting place for the Templars, you can see a sculpture representing the Ark of the Covenant on wheels. A few meters away, you can also see a sculpture of the Queen of Sheba in the decor of an archway. The presence of these 2 biblical elements in Chartres makes some people think that the Ark of the Covenant is hidden below the cathedral's foundation, which dates back to the 11th century. Perhaps they're right.
The Templars could very well have brought the Ark to France. If we study Chartres Cathedral, the number of carvings that are coded and full of symbolism are very heavily influenced by Templar thinking and what we might call Templar secrets. And if they had decided that they would place this absolutely priceless relic in a place where it would be as safe as possible, where better than under a magnificent cathedral where holy men are in residence and are guarding it night and day. It couldn't be any safer than that in terms of spiritual guardians.
Unless the Templars took it somewhere else.
The power of the Templars, and again we link in with the King Arthur codes and the Templar codes. The Arthurians were on all sorts of quests, and although they are described as the Grail, there is no reason not to accept that they were after the Ark as well.
In his book, The Templars and the Ark of the Covenant, British author Graham Phillips claims that the Templars took the Ark to Great Britain, where they secretly buried it in a field between Banbury and Coventry in the English Midlands. There is also a possibility that the Ark was buried under the Rosslyn Chapel near Edinburgh. According to that story as well, the Templars were the ones who carried the Ark to Scotland. Or the Freemasons may have locked it in a secret vault. Since the Rosslyn Chapel is highly associated with esotericism, in fact, this is where the Da Vinci Code adventure ends, the Ark would be right at home. Why not? And the list goes on.
I think that if the Ark really survived the Babylonian conquest, then it's probably hidden, if it still exists, somewhere in Jerusalem. In the Six-Day War of 1967, the Israelis broke through to East Jerusalem and to the Western Wall again, and some unauthorized investigations underneath the Temple Mount were conducted. The rabbis who were supervising those excavations said that by reference to various rabbinic texts, they knew exactly where the Ark was to be found. And they said that they got to within yards of where the Ark was before being stopped.
The adventures of Indiana Jones have made the Ark of the Covenant the most famous of all holy treasures. The Holy Grail and Noah's Ark, relics that used to excite generations of adventurers, now pale in comparison to the Ark's powers of attraction. Since the release of the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, hardly a year goes by before a new theory is published on the possible whereabouts of the Ark of the Covenant.
Now, if we look at the other side of the story, and we accept the biblical account at face value, then we say that Moses had an experience, a religious experience, a deep and traumatic experience up on Mount Sinai. And as a result, he imparted certain laws to his people. And that those laws on the tablets of stone were kept safe inside this mysterious ark. It does, without going off into all the wildly romantic fiction of the hunt for the lost ark in the films, it does seem to have been something which had a great deal of power within itself. Was there something, some ancient artifact of great power inside that box?
Historians, at least the majority of them, doubt that the Ark actually exists. In their minds, we shouldn't take the description of the Ark literally and look for a physical object. We should instead see it as a symbol representing the Lord's presence among the Israelites.
Now, the interesting thing is that if you had to make something up, why would you make up an ark? Well, you'd make up an ark because perhaps there's a kernel of truth in it, that they did make a box to preserve the law. It might not have been tablets of stone, but they might have, in times of exile or when they actually created the first temple, have made a container to preserve the Holy Scriptures, their law, Jewish law or Hebrew law. And as such, they would have perhaps invented an ark. We don't know.
Imagine for a moment if such an object actually existed. What would we do with it? If the past is any indication of the future, let's hope that it is never found.